In this video, we're going to do a detail pass. We're going to detail using props or minor static meshes. And we're going to tweak using already placed static meshes by resizing them, rescaling them, and making sure that they fit into their space. You have a variety of workflows you can use. You can insert all of the props into your world, into the level, by dragging them from the content browser and then start arranging them, duplicating them, and placing them in certain sections of the level. Or you can focus on a specific section of the map and just start detailing and then branch out into other sections. So that's what we're gonna do. First, we're gonna focus on the doors and the doorways, and then we're just gonna branch out from there and continue to other sections of the map. So for the doors, we have the door already placed. So let's go ahead and find a door frame. Left click and drag right in here. And again, we're gonna position the single doorway first, and then we're gonna duplicate it to the other sections. And as we are detailing with props, I'm also going to start tweaking some of these already existing static meshes. For example, like this column on top, I think it's a little too thick coming off to the sides. So I'm going to want to rescale this so there's a little smaller indentation. And this is just a small aesthetic. And this is going to be a part of the detailing process as well. So we have the structure, the framework of our environment finished. And once you have that, then you can expand into detailing using props and tweaking existing static meshes. And then we're going to do another detail pass with using decals. There is one more thing I'm going to do before we go into the sped up workflow, and that is save a new version of this map. Save as, and this is going to be version 4 and detailing. And click save. So as I mentioned previously, I start the detailing process by picking a section within the environment and focus on that section first. That section should be a part of the focal point. You want to start with the focal point first, or areas where your player is going to be spending a lot of time, because you want to set a standard of detail and quality that you will measure other parts of the environment too. Now the focal point areas and where the player is going to be spending a lot of time, that's where you'll spend most of your detailing and inserting props. So I went ahead and inserted a door frame and made sure that it lined up to the door, creating no gaps in geometry. This is where I begin to work with the grid scale of 1 and 5. And then I took the door frame and the door and duplicated to the other side, to the second doorway. Then I inserted a flower pot, a plant, also a wall wire, and a trash can. And I began to arrange them next to the walls in an interesting and functional manner, trying to think of how would people who design this environment and walk through it every day, how would they position those elements inside this hallway? So this is a very important aspect of placing props, is how do you add detail that seems authentic and real to the environment. First, you should study references that are similar to the environment that you're creating and see real-world examples of how similar props are being placed and used in the environment that is similar to yours. And then you have to take another step and a designer approach and make it interesting for your environment. So you don't want to exactly duplicate what you see in reference. You want to use it as a guide so it looks believable. That should be your starting point. And then you look at your environment and see, does it look interesting visually and functionally? Does it make sense? And begin to look at it from the point of view of the player and the characters that live within that environment. Imagine yourself that you are a character who walks through this hallway, through this corridor every day. It could be, for example, a character that works there. And do these props and this detail placement, does it make sense? Is it functional? And is it aesthetically pleasing? And the more you work with environments, placing props, and the more experience you get, the more intuitive it will become. So if you're just starting out and you're not quite sure, just follow reference, and then you can add your own little spin, and with more experience of detailing, and building environments, you'll get better. So I have inserted paintings on the wall. There are 2 different paintings we can use, and I scaled both of them in size to make them larger for the wall. I also inserted AC vents for the top of the ceiling, and I duplicated them all the way across. And I inserted exit signs, and I positioned them only next to the side hallways. And then I used a second AC vent, scaled it down in size a little bit, and placed it along the window wall on the bottom, which adds additional detail and breaks up the repetition of the bottom wall column support. For the final detail prop, we are going to insert and work with a wall light strip and a wall light. Both of these are emissive. That means they will glow without a light being placed in front of it. And these light strips will add a lot to the visual impact of this corridor. They also serve a function as a light source. My favorite part about these light strips is they can be used in any way and they can be attached to any wall, floor, or ceiling. So how you use these lights is completely up to you. You can place them along the floor or you can place them along the ceiling. I decided to do a single strip on every other column and use a square light on columns where there are no strips to kind of break up the repetition. And when you begin to place these light strips, you have to start thinking of lighting your environment. Since these are going to be a light source where the lighting is going to emit from, you have to start to imagine of what the lighting situation that you want for this corridor. Once we go into lighting this environment, we may add or place these lights in other locations. This will depend on how the lighting looks when we begin to deal with lighting. So here I went ahead and also placed a couple of strip lights next to the elevator wall. This will help to frame that wall and that door to kind of draw the eye to it. And here I ran into a few issues of making sure that the light fits into that indentation of the column. And I'm working with scale, trying to optimize that fitting position of the strip light, making sure there was enough of spacing for it to fit on the column. Then once I placed all the lighting strips and the wall lights in the main hallway, in our focal point, the important area of the map, then I duplicated those strip lights to the second floor. We do have windows on the second floor, so there might be some lighting that's going to enter when we do exterior lighting, but it may not be enough. Inserting these lights keeps the consistency going from the main corridor up to the second floor, and it also adds additional depth as the lighting continues into other sections of this environment. Here I realized that I needed 2 columns that I did not do for the other hallway. So instead of reinserting them from the content browser, I simply went to the first hallway and I copied the columns and the lights and duplicated it to the other side. And I just pressed Alt-4 for lit mode to see the effects of these strip lights. We are now done with prop placement and detailing using props. And for the final section of this video, I spent some time and detailed by scaling down and making certain static meshes of this corridor fit into their space by rescaling them and making them better part of the environment. For example, such as the columns that frame the side hallways. I did not like their original position and scale, and since they have to be a little thicker than the rest of the columns, I have to make them consistent on both of the side corridors and make them a better part of the environment. So I ran into some issues here by trying to reposition and rescale them. I tweaked a lot of these columns by scaling them up, and I kept running into a few size issues and gaps. I also changed the grid size a few times to a setting of 1 without realizing it, which created tiny little gaps. So I had to delete these columns and then just duplicate already placed columns from the first hallway to the second hallway. So it took a bit of finessing, but I finally got it down to where I liked it. So to give you a few tips when you run into issues like this, and you just can't quite get the right size, the right scale, and the right position of the static meshes. You can scrap the entire thing and delete that section and then restart it over again. In this case, I had already placed a few static meshes in the other hallway and I like their position. And after tweaking and tweaking and tweaking and just not getting the right scale and position down, I deleted these columns and I just went and duplicated from the other hallway again and restarted. Another thing that helps is to work on something else. So if you're stuck in a certain section, just let it go for a little bit, work on another section of the level, and then come back to it. And that switching usually helps to clear your mind and then reapproach the same problem with a fresh set of eyes. And here I'm doing some final tweaks, very minor scale and detail, by scaling some of the static meshes and making sure that some of the detail and some of the seams line up a little bit better. At this point, we're gonna call it done for the detail pass. We do have one more thing to add, and that's going to be decals, and we'll do that in the next video. But as far as detailing using props and minor static meshes, we are done. Now, depending on the type of environment and what kind of static meshes you have, the detailing process can be a lot more time consuming. This is a fairly simple and clean environment, so we only had a few props to deal with. But if you're creating more of a dirty, destructive, grungy environment where you have a lot of debris, this process might take you a little longer. In the part 2 video of this section, we're going to add additional detail using decals. And one last thing I want to mention is that I updated the camera reference positions to a better angle. Since now this environment has been blocked in and detailed, we can now set up more accurate camera angles throughout this environment. So let me run through them. Here's angle number 1, number 2, number 3, 4, and 5. Now let's go ahead and do a detail pass using decals.